I never thought the loudest silence I'd ever hear would come from my own daughter. That afternoon, sunlight poured through the glass walls of my office. Warm, golden mocking. My phone buzzed with her name, Sophie. I smiled before answering, but the moment I heard her voice, something in me shattered. "You're not my real father," she shouted through tears. "Dad's boyfriend is better than you'll ever be." For a second, I forgot to breathe. The world just froze. I stared out at the city skyline. Those silver buildings, tall and perfect, like the life I'd built brick by brick. But right then, all I saw was the 12-year-old girl who used to braid my hair and call me mommy. My assistant knocked softly. I waved her off, pretending to be fine. Pretending was something I'd perfected. I took a deep breath, pressing my palm against the cold glass. My reflection stared back, steady, successful, put together. But behind the flawless makeup and silk blouse, there was still that woman who once begged to be seen, to be loved, to be chosen. "Fine," I whispered to no one. "If that's how you feel, Sophie, fine." But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of the truth. Seattle rain always had a way of knowing when you were falling apart. 2 years ago, I stood in that same drizzle outside the King County Courthouse, mascara running, heart splitting, pretending the cold was the reason my hands shook. Mark walked out first, his expression unreadable. The man beside him, Ethan, waited with an umbrella, gently taking his hand. People whispered. Cameras clicked. I wanted to vanish. When Mark told me he was leaving, it wasn't for another woman. It was for him. For someone who made him feel whole. His words, not mine. I tried to be understanding, tried to be modern, mature, but there's no graceful way to be replaced. Especially not when your daughter looks up at you with those big brown eyes and asks, "Mommy, why are you crying?" The custody battle was cruel. Every hearing chipped away at what was left of my dignity. I remember clutching my mother's old bracelet, silver, engraved with tiny letters. "You are enough." It used to calm me when nothing else could. But the day the judge gave Mark primary custody, I didn't cry. Not in court. Not even when Sophie ran into his arms instead of mine. I just stood there, silent, because I realized something terrifying. No one was coming to save me. Not Mark. Not my daughter. Not even the world that loved to pity me. That night, I drove until the city lights blurred. Parked by the water. Took off the bracelet, stared at it under the dashboard glow, and whispered, "If I am enough, then prove it, Olivia." The next morning, I packed up my life, left our house, the one with the blue shutters and broken porch swing, and moved into a one-bedroom apartment downtown. I started taking night classes, waited tables, and learned how to code websites on an old laptop that barely worked. Every line of code felt like stitching a torn piece of myself back together. I stopped checking Mark's posts. I stopped waiting for Sophie's calls. And somewhere between exhaustion and healing, I decided they could keep the past. I'd build the future. The first year alone was the hardest. Seattle felt colder, without Sophie's laughter echoing down the hallways of our little home. Nights were long, mornings even longer. I worked double shifts at a cafe on Pike Street, serving lattes with fake smiles and aching wrists, then went home to crash my laptop keys until dawn, building websites for small local shops that couldn't afford real agencies. It was survival at first, but then something shifted. Her name was Maya Torres, a client who owned a tiny flower boutique across the street. She noticed my designs, my exhaustion, and one day she said, "You've got more in you than you think, Olivia." Maya became my first real mentor, the kind who believed in women before they believed in themselves. She taught me about business, branding, clients, and courage. She introduced me to people who needed websites, logos, marketing plans. Slowly, Olivia Hayes Digital was born, not from ambition, but necessity. My first paycheck from a corporate client came 6 months later. I cried holding that check, not because it was big, but because it had my name printed on it. No one could take that away. I started saving, every dollar, every tip, every sleepless night. I moved from that cramped apartment to a small condo overlooking the bay. My mornings were filled with coffee instead of tears, and my nights with planning instead of pain. But I didn't post about it. I didn't brag. When Mark called about co-parenting boundaries, I kept it professional. When Sophie visited, on weekends, I never mentioned the business. She was too young to understand, and I didn't want to burden her with my version of pride. I told people I was doing fine. The truth? I was doing better than fine. By the second year, I had 5 employees, 3 clients on retainer, and one mantra pinned on my office wall. You are enough. Still, every milestone carried a quiet ache. I'd see Sophie smile on Mark's social media, new house, new vacations, new family. Her caption said, Dad and Ethan took me hiking, and I'd wonder if she missed me. But instead of bitterness, I built. For every unanswered call, I designed a new campaign. For every silent birthday, I launched another client site. Success became my language. Healing became my proof. And by the time my name started appearing in business magazines under Seattle's Women Entrepreneurs to Watch, I realized something profound. I wasn't rebuilding my old life. I was creating one that finally belonged to me. It was a Thursday morning when the past came knocking, literally. I was reviewing a client pitch when my receptionist buzzed. There's a Mr. Hayes here to see you, she said, hesitation in her voice. I froze. I hadn't heard that name in years, not said to me at least. Mark Hayes. My ex-husband. The man who once held my heart like it was glass and dropped it without flinching. And then she added, he's here with his partner and your daughter. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My fingers hovered over the laptop keyboard, trembling slightly before I whispered, send them in. When the door opened, time folded. Mark looked older, streaks of gray in his hair, guilt behind the polite smile. Ethan stood beside him, perfectly put together, his hand resting gently on Mark's arm. And Sophie, my Sophie, taller now, with braces and that teenage attitude that felt like armor. She looked around my office, the panoramic view of downtown, the tall plants, the framed certificates, and the sleek silver logo behind me that read, Hayes and Company. Digital, founder, Olivia Hayes. Her brows furrowed. Wait, this is yours? I smiled, calm. Yes, sweetheart. This is where I work. Mark chuckled nervously. I had no idea you. Of course you didn't, I interrupted softly. You never ask. Silence settled heavy in the air. Ethan cleared his throat, trying to keep things polite. We wanted to stop by. Sophie insisted. She said she had something to say. That's when Sophie blurted it out again, the words that started it all. Dad's boyfriend is better than you ever were. Her voice cracked halfway through, but she hid it behind a defiant stare. I took a slow breath, stood up, and walked around my desk, heels clicking against the marble floor. My reflection in the glass wall showed a woman in control, not the one who used to cry herself to sleep. I crouched slightly, meeting her at eye level. Maybe he is Sophie, I said quietly. Maybe he's funnier, or calmer, or easier to love. But that doesn't make me less of a mother. Her eyes wavered. You left us. No, I whispered. I lost you. There's a difference. Mark shifted uncomfortably, his guilt written all over his face. Olivia, we didn't come here to... I turned toward him, cutting him off with a raised hand. No, you came here to see if I survived. To see if the woman you left behind was still crawling. I'm not. I walked back to my desk, picking up a folder and placing it in front of him. Inside were glossy magazine pages, my face under headlines like Seattle's Tech Visionaries and From Single Mom to CEO. His lips parted slightly. You built this. I smiled, serene. From nothing. From what you left behind. Ethan looked genuinely stunned. This is incredible. Thank you, I said, voice steady. But I didn't do it for applause. I did it so my daughter would one day understand what strength looks like when it doesn't come easy. Sophie's lip trembled. I didn't know. I walked closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You weren't supposed to. I wanted you to live freely, without my pain weighing you down. Tears welled in her eyes. I said horrible things. I smiled sadly. We all say things we don't mean when we don't understand the full story. The room was silent, just the city hum beyond the glass, and the weight of truth finally settling between us. I didn't need to prove I was better. They already knew. I poured 3 glasses of water and placed them on the table, one for each of them. My hands didn't shake this time. I didn't bring you here to prove anything, I began, my voice low, steady. You've already seen what I've built, but I want you to understand why I built it. Mark and Ethan exchanged a look. Sophie sat still, her shoulders drawn in. I built this, I said, gesturing around the room, because I had to learn how to breathe without being someone's afterthought. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but I lifted a hand gently, not to silence him, but to reclaim the space. When you left, Mark, I thought the hardest part was losing you. I was wrong. The hardest part was losing the version of myself that depended on your approval. He swallowed hard, eyes wet. And Sophie. I turned to her, my voice softening. You don't owe me apologies. You owe yourself understanding. You can love your father, and you can love Ethan, and still not hate me. Love doesn't have sides. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. I smiled gently. I know. You were repeating words you didn't understand yet. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. The power in the room shifted, not loud, not dramatic, just real. So here's what happens next, I said, clasping my hands. If we're going to rebuild this family, whatever version of it we have left, there are conditions. Ethan blinked. Conditions? Yes. I looked at Mark first. You don't get to guilt me anymore. Not for surviving. Not for thriving. You made your choices, and so did I respect mine. He nodded silently, tears brimming. Then I looked at Sophie. You're 13 now. You're allowed to question, to feel torn, to explore. But from today onward, you will never weaponize love. You will never compare hearts as if one's worth more than another. You hear me? She nodded, crying softly. I hear you. And as for me, I continued, I promise not to let my pain become your inheritance. You'll know your mother as someone who stood tall, not bitter, not broken, just real. The room was quiet. For the first time in years, it wasn't tension filling the air. It was truth. Mark reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I found this when we moved, he said. Inside was my mother's silver bracelet, the one I thought I'd lost forever. He placed it on the table between us. You should have it. I stared at it, the tiny engraving catching the light. You are enough. It felt like the universe exhaling. I slipped it onto my wrist, the metal cool against my skin, and smiled faintly. I know, I whispered. 3 months later, the world felt quieter. Not empty, just finally at peace. The seasons had shifted. Seattle's chill gave way to crisp spring mornings. I moved into a lake house just outside the city, a place where silence wasn't punishment anymore, but something sacred. Sophie started visiting every other weekend. The first time, she barely spoke. The second time, she helped me cook dinner. The third time, she laughed, really laughed for the first time in years. Healing didn't come in grand gestures. It came in small ones. A note she left on the fridge. Love you, Mom. A text on a Tuesday night. Can we talk? One afternoon, while unpacking old boxes, Sophie found it, the silver bracelet. She turned it in her hands, the engraving catching the afternoon light. What does it mean? She asked softly. I smiled. It was your grandmother's. She gave it to me when I thought the world had stopped loving me. She said those words were a reminder that no matter who leaves, who doubts, or who forgets you, you are still enough. Sophie slipped the bracelet onto her wrist and looked up at me. So now it's my turn to remember that? My throat tightened. Yes, baby. Now it's yours. We sat by the window, the lake glittering beyond the glass. For the first time, she rested her head on my shoulder, the same way she used to when she was little. And in that moment, everything that was broken didn't feel broken anymore. It just was. Later that evening, as I watched her sleep on the couch, I realized something I had spent years running from. Love doesn't always look like what you planned. Sometimes it breaks you first, then rebuilds you into the person you were meant to become. Soft piano fades, her voice calm, resolute. When my daughter shouted that her father's boyfriend was better than me, she wasn't wrong. He might have been funnier, calmer, more patient. But I was never meant to compete with anyone. I was meant to become someone. And I did. Because the truth is, I wasn't just her mother. I was the woman who taught her, and myself, what it means to be enough.